Year 2, I hope you're all right. So this is for Thursday's English lesson, and we are going to turn our plan here into a story here. Now it is pretty daunting having a blank piece of paper, but we did focus on our plan quite a bit. We added adjectives, adverbs and sentence openers to our ideas as well. So hopefully this will really help us when we're coming to write our own story. So I've got once upon a time, small shop, bustling street, Mr. and Mrs. Jewell, own jewellery shop, London gold rings. And we put sparkling, magnificent and also unfortunately. So we need to use these ideas and we need to turn them into a sentence. Okay, it sounds a little bit tricky, but we can do it. So I think we could have a go at we could write once upon a time there was an old married couple named Mr. and Mrs. Jewell to introduce our characters. So I hope you can see me writing there. Once upon a time. Got my sentence open already. There was an old married couple named Mr. and Mrs. Jewell. Ooh, sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Jewell. Full stop. Okay. We could talk a little bit about how they owned the shop now. So we could write, they owned a small jewellery shop in the bustling streets of London. So we've already used once upon a time. They owned a small shop, we could do, in the bustling streets of London. Okay. Oh. They owned a small jewellery shop, we should say, a small jewellery shop in the bustling, and that means busy, bustling streets of London. I've put a capital L for London because it is a place. Okay, let me read it again. Once upon a time there was an old married couple named Mr. and Mrs. Jewell. They owned a small jewellery shop in the bustling streets of London. So we've used these ideas already. So actually that wasn't too scary because actually we've just turned these three bits into some actual sentences. So I don't feel that worried anymore. Oh, I hope you don't feel worried either. Okay, so they lived in the bustling streets of London. We could say they were jewellery designers and they created magnificent golden rings. They were, or we could say jewellers, couldn't we? They were jewellers and they created, because we put magnificent rings, didn't we? They created magnificent, magnificent rings. Okay, so it's quite a nice little introduction, isn't it, to Mr. and Mrs. Jewell? And it didn't take too long because we already had those ideas in our plan. Okay, then we could say, just trying to give a reason as to why they became poor. I think it would be a nice idea to say that unfortunately there were lots of new jewellery shops opening and they weren't able to make as much money as they had been before. That could give a little bit more detail. I know we didn't write that in the plan, but I was thinking about that last night. I think it'd be good to give a little bit more detail as to actually why they didn't have any money. So we could say, and we could use unfortunately, couldn't we? So we could start it off, unfortunately. Unfortunately, lots of new shops, lots of new jewellery shops. I think I've spelled jewellery wrong. Oops, there we go. I always struggle with the word jewellery. See, I'm a teacher and I'm not that great at spelling either, so don't worry, you will get there. Unfortunately, lots of new jewellery shops were opening on their road, on their street, because we've used street, haven't we? On their street. And they were unable to sell as many rings as they had been in the past. And they were unable to open as many, oh no, and they were unable to sell, silly me, that's why it's really important to read your sentences back, and they were unable to sell as many rings as they could in the past, or as they did in the past. There we go. As they did in the past. Full stop. Then we could talk about how they realised they only had enough money for one ring and how they felt really sad. So we could start it off with one night, or we could start it off with, well, we've already had, unfortunately, so maybe we could just say one night they realised that they only had enough money, enough gold to make one more ring, which made them feel quite sad. So one night, Mr. and Mrs. Jewell realised that they only had enough gold to make one more ring, which made them feel very sad. Which made them feel very sad. And we could say they decided to leave the gold and try and make the best ring in the morning. We could put, couldn't we? Because the gold needs to be left out ready for those elves, doesn't it? Let's just double check. So we've got one all, yep, so they've only got enough gold for one ring, which made them very sad. They decided to make a ring in the morning and went to bed. So we've set up the scene. We've explained who the characters are. So once upon a time there was an old married couple named Mr. and Mrs. Jewell. They owned a small jewellery shop in the bustling streets of London. They were jewellers and they created magnificent rings. And then we've explained what the problem was. Unfortunately, lots of new jewellery shops were opening on their street and they were unable to sell as many rings as they did in the past. One night, Mr. and Mrs. Jewell realised that they only had enough gold to make one more ring, which made them feel very sad. They decided to make a ring in the morning and went to bed. So that's all done. Now we can get on to the fun stuff here. So we've already thought of a load of sentence openers, an exciting activity to describe the elves, so this shouldn't take too long. So we've got, when all was dark and quiet, two sneaky tiny elves snuck gingerly into the workshop. What a brilliant sentence, and we've already got it from yesterday. So we can write it down here. When all was dark and quiet, two, I've got TWO to describe it, it's two people. Two sneaky, tiny elves. Then we can write snuck gingerly into the workshop. So we can tick that off, we can tick that off, we can tick, we've done all that. We can tick snuck gingerly. There we go. And then we could introduce the actual elves' names. So these elves were called Glitter and Glamour. And then we could say how they made the most beautiful ring. We could use our similes, you remember how they describe something and liken it to something else. So we could say, when all was dark and quiet, two sneaky tiny elves snuck gingerly into the workshop. Their names were Glitter, and I've got a capital G for glitter because it is a name, and a capital G for glamour. Their names were Glitter and Glamour. And so when all was dark and quiet, two sneaky tiny elves snuck gingerly into the workshop. Their names were Glitter and Glamour, and they helped make the most magnificent ring, and they helped make the most magnificent ring. Then we can say about the ring was as twisted. Actually, we probably need to say with the gold that was left over, and they helped make the most magnificent ring. So I'm going to cross that out. With the gold that was left by the sad couple, or by the upset couple. Okay, so then that actually explains that they're using that gold, because otherwise it sounds like they just use any old gold. So they helped make the most magnificent ring with the gold that was left by the upset couple. So then we could talk about the ring. So we could say the ring, and we can use these ideas up here. The ring was as twisted as the branches of a hazel tree. And it was as shiny as the moon. There we go. And it was as shiny as the moon. There we go. So we've written so much already just from the ideas that were used in our plan. Okay, so let's have a little think about what we're going to write next. So we could have a little think. Oh, we could talk about maybe how Glitter and Glamour sped off just before Mr. and Mrs. Jewel came back, and maybe we could talk about their reaction to finding the ring. Okay, I'm just going to move this down. I've not got much paper left, so I'm going to have to stop the video soon, and we can write the next bit for tomorrow. So then we could say, oh, didn't we write just as the sun popped up? Yes, we could do just as the sun popped up. The elves sped away before Mr. and Mrs. Jewel came to the shop. So just as the sun popped up. I like that. Just as the sun popped up, the cheeky elves, we can write the cheeky elves sped away just as, or maybe we've already had just, haven't we? We could just put as Mr. and Mrs. Jewel arrived. Now I wonder what we could say about Mr. and Mrs. Jewel and their reaction. We could say they could not believe their eyes. They'd never seen a ring so beautiful. They were in disbelief. They were amazed. We could say I quite like they could not believe their eyes. They could not believe, could not believe their eyes. And we could use the conjunction for. They could not believe their eyes, for there was the most beautiful ring that appeared in front of them. For there was the most beautiful ring. I'm sorry about this lack of paper. There was the most beautiful ring that appeared before them. Do you think I'm going to be able to fit it in? Appeared before them. I don't think Mr. Patelli would be too happy if I get Sharpie on the wall before them. Oh, we did it. Right, I'm going to read this to you, and then tomorrow we will start where we left off and finish the story. And that didn't take too long in the grand scheme of things. So I'm going to read the story. Once upon a time, there was an old married couple named Mr. and Mrs. Jewell. They owned a small jewellery shop in the bustling streets of London. They were jewellers and they created magnificent rings. Unfortunately, lots of new jewellery shops were opening on their street and they were unable to sell as many rings as they did in the past. One night, Mr. and Mrs. Jewell realised that they only had enough gold to make one more ring, which made them feel very sad. They decided to make a ring in the morning and went to bed. When all was dark and quiet, two sneaky tiny elves snuck gingerly into the workshop. Their names were Glitter and Glamour, and they helped make the most magnificent ring with the gold that was left by the upset couple. The ring was as twisted as the branches of a hazel tree, and it was as shiny as the moon. Just as the sun popped up, the cheeky elves sped away as Mr. and Mrs. Jewell arrived. They could not believe their eyes, for there was the most beautiful ring that appeared before them. Oh, I like it. I'm excited to write the next bit. I hope you are excited to write your story. Hope that helped, and we will move on to the next bit ready for tomorrow. Bye-bye.